super intelligence reaching it first. Who are you picking and why?
OpenAI.
He's the guy the chip industry reads before making a move. Meet Dylan Patel. He's a quick thinker with a depth and breadth of knowledge that is unrivaled in AI.
You know, for one, ScaleAI is like, it's kind of cooked.
And today, Dylan's answering the tough questions. What went wrong with GPT4.5?
In general, it's not that useful and it's too slow. You zoom back, right? It's like, if you believe superintelligence is the only thing that matters, then you need to chase it. Otherwise, you're a loser. It's not the money, it's more the power.
What do you think is going on at Apple?
They hate NVIDIA, maybe for reasonable reasons. Models are just like pansies about like giving me data.
You're using O3 day to day, even though there's, it takes so much time to actually get your response back.
The model I go to the most is either
50% of white-collar jobs could disappear.
Generally, people work less than ever before. The average amount of hours worked 50 years ago was way higher. And then eventually, like, there just won't be humans in the loop, right? And eventually,
you believe that?
It's an art form to some extent. What is worth researching and what's not? GPUs that ended up breaking, it was called Bumpgate. It was a very interesting thing. You don't or you do?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay, so this is a very fun story, right?
All right, Dylan, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you. I've seen you do a number of talks. I've seen you do a number of interviews. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things. So first thing I want to talk about is Meta. Let's start with Llama 4. No, it's been a little while in the AI world since that kind of released, but there was a ton of anticipation. It was good, not great. It wasn't kind of world-changing at the moment. And then they delayed Behemoth. What do you think is going on there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny, there's like 3 different models and they're all quite different. So Behemoth got delayed. I actually think they might not ever release it. I'm not sure. There's a lot of problems with it, the way they trained it. Some of the decisions they made don't pan out. And then there's Maverick and Scout, right? And so one of those models is actually decent. It's pretty good. It wasn't the best on release, but it was comparable to the best Chinese model on release. But then, Alibaba came out with a new model. DeepSeek came out with a new model. So then I was like, okay, it's worse. The other one was objectively just bad. I know for a fact they trained it as a response to DeepSeek, trying to use more of the elements of DeepSeek's architecture, but they didn't do it properly. It was just a rush job, and it really messed up. Because they went really hard on the sparsity on the MOE. But funnily enough, if you actually look at the model, it oftentimes won't even route tokens to the certain experts. So it's like a waste of training. Basically, in between every layer, the router can route to whatever expert it wants to, and it learns which expert to route to. And each expert learns its own independent things, and it's really not something observable by people. But what you can see is tokens. Which experts do they route to, when they go through the model, and it's just some of them just didn't get routed to. So it's you have a bunch of empty experts that are not doing stuff. So there's clearly something wrong with training.
Is it an expertise thing internally? I mean, they have to have some of the best people in the world, and we're going to get to some of their hiring efforts as of late. But why? Why haven't they been able to really do it?
I think it's a combination and confluence of things, right? Yes, they have tons of talent, they have tons of compute. But the organization of people is always the most challenging thing. Which ideas are actually the best? Who's the technical leader choosing the best ideas, right? It's if you have a bunch of great researchers, that's awesome. But then if you put product managers on top of them, and then there's no technical lead who's evaluating what to choose, then you have a lot of problems, right? OpenAI, right? Yeah, Sam is a great leader and he gets all the resources, but the technical leader is Greg Brockman. Right, and Greg Brockman is choosing a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of other folks, right, like Mark Chen and others who are the technical leaders who are really deciding technically which route do we go down, because a researcher is going to have their research, they're going to think their research is the best. Who's evaluating everyone's research and then deciding that idea is great, let's use that one. That one sucks, let's not use that one. It's just really difficult. So when you end up with researchers not having a leader who is technical and can choose. And really, choose the right things, you end up with, great, we did have all the right ideas, but part of AI research is that you have all the wrong ideas too, and you learn from them, and you have the right ideas and you choose them, right? And now, what happens if your choosing of them is really bad, and actually you choose some wrong ideas, and then you go up the branch of sort of research, right? You've chosen this bad idea. This is something we're going to do. Let's go further down. And then now you're branching off of this bad idea, there's a lot more research because, it's well, we're not going to go back and undo the decision we made, right? So everyone's like, oh, we made that decision. Okay, let's see what's researchable from here. And so you end up with like this like potentiality of like great researchers wasting their time on bad paths, right? And there's sort of this like thing that researchers talk about, which is taste, right? Which is very funny, right? You think like these are like nerds who won like the International Math Olympiad, and like that's their like, you know, claim to fame. But when they were like a teenager, then they got a job at OpenAI or whatever at 19, or Meta or whatever. But there's actually a lot of taste involved, right? It's an art form to some extent. What is worth researching and what's not. And it's an art form of choosing what's the best, because you're making all these ideas down here on the scale here, and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, let's now, you know, great, those experiments were all done with like 100 GPUs. Awesome. Now let's make a run with 100,000 GPUs with that idea. It's like, well, things don't just translate perfectly. So there's a lot of taste and intuition here. It's not that they don't have good researchers, it's that like who's choosing the taste, right, is difficult, right? Like, you know, it's like, you don't care about movie critic reviews, you care about Rotten Tomatoes, you know, audience score perhaps, right? And it's like who's the critic that you're listening to though, right? And it's challenging to, you know, even if you have great people, to actually have good stuff come out because of organizational issues, because the right people aren't at the right spot and decision makers, and maybe the wrong person gets to like be political and have their idea and research path put into the model when it's not necessarily a good idea.
Yeah. And okay, well, let's continue down the path of who is making decisions. Obviously, Zuck last week, there was a lot of news about him giving $100 million offers. I mean, Sam Altman literally said it. They acquired ScaleAI seemingly for Alexander Wang and his team. He's in founder mode. What does the ScaleAI acquisition actually give Meta? First, let's start there.
Yeah, so I think, you know, for one, ScaleAI is like, it's kind of cooked. Right now,
as a company,
right?
Because everybody's like, canceling their contracts.
Google's backing out. I think they're going to spend on the order, I've heard, like $250 million this year with them, and they're backing out. Obviously, they've spent a lot of money, and there's stuff they can't back out of, but it's like that's going to go down a lot, right? Yeah. OpenAI allegedly like cut the external Slack connection, right? So there's no like Slack between Scale and OpenAI anymore. So obviously that spend's
it's the ultimate breakup between companies.
Yeah, so like obviously these companies are like, I don't want Meta to know what I'm doing, right, with my data, because that's one of the unique aspects of models is like, what do you want with your custom data? So clearly, Scale is not, you know, Meta didn't buy Scale for Scale, right? They bought Scale for the purposes of having Alex and his few best colleagues. There's a few other folks at Scale who are really awesome as well, and they bought them to bring them over, right? Yeah. Now the question is sort of like, is the data that Scale has good? Is knowing all the paths of sort of data labeling that all these other companies were doing good? Sure. But more importantly, it's like we want to get, you know, someone to help us lead this super intelligence effort, right? And Alex is you know, he's same age as me. He's 28 or 29-ish. Yeah, I think he's around that age. Stupendously successful in every way, shape, or form, right? People can hate on him if they want, but he's obviously very successful, especially when he convinces Mark Zuckerberg, who's not an irrational person. He's very smart to buy his company, right? Like, you know, it's like, and his company was doing, you know, nearly $1 billion of revenue, and is like, let's chase super intelligence, right? Which is very different, right? If you go look at Zuckerberg's interviews, even a handful of months ago, he wasn't chasing super intelligence, right? He was chasing like, AI is good and great, but like AGI is not a thing that is going to happen soon. So sort of this is a big shift in strategy, in that he's like basically saying, yeah, like super intelligence is all that matters. We're on the path there, I believe now. What can I do to catch up? Because I'm behind.
It seems like the narrative throughout all of these major companies is now super intelligence, even when it was AGI just a month ago. Why the transition, by the way?
The word AGI has no meaning anymore.
Yeah, it's amorphous, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
It's like you can like look at an Anthropic researcher in the face and be like, what does AGI mean? And they literally think it just means an automated software developer. And it's like, that's not artificial general intelligence, but that's what they think, right? And like a lot of researchers across the ecosystem. Ilya saw this, you know, Ilya saw everything first, obviously, Ilya Sutskever, and he started his company, Safe Superintelligence, right, SSI, and I think that started the rebranding, and now, like, you know, many months later, it's like almost a year now, a year later, I think it's like 9 months to a year later, you know, everyone's like, oh, superintelligence is a thing. Yeah. So another research direction, right, that Ilya got first, right? Whether it was like pre-training scaling or like, you know, the original like vision networks, right? Pre-training scaling, reasoning, right? All these things that he sort of had the idea at least, if not first, among the first, and worked on it a lot. Sort of Ilya's got this one too, which is the rebranding. So maybe he's got marketing too.
Yeah, well, Zuck, at least rumored, tried to acquire SSI and was rebuffed by Ilya, right? And then I wanted to also ask you about Daniel Gross and Nat Freeman. I think it's rumors, maybe confirmed at this point, but it seems like Zuck is trying to hire them as well. What did those two folks give Zuck?
Zuck tried to buy SSI. He also tried to buy Thinking Machines. Like, these are rumors. He also tried to buy Perplexity. These are all in some of the media, right? He tried to buy all of these companies. But specifically, like, some of the rumors that have been floated around is basically that, like, Mark tried to buy SSI. Ilya obviously said no because he is, like, committed to super intelligence and straight shotting it, right? Not, like, worried on products. And he's probably not even that money focused, right? He's mostly focused on, like, building it. Right, a true believer in all respects and regards, right? So obviously he probably was like, no. I don't know what the makeup of equity is there, but Ilya's probably got strong enough votership and ownership to be like, no. And if the rumors are true about Daniel Gross, then like Daniel Gross probably was the one wanting the acquisition, right? He's like, yeah, this is awesome, right? Yeah, another founder. And he comes from, not an AI research background, although he's technical to a degree, but like, it's like he had his venture fund with Nat, and then he founded SSI with Ilya, and he probably wanted the acquisition, and then it's like, well, I was pushing for an acquisition and it didn't happen, and I'm just guessing, like, he's probably, if he's going at all, I don't actually know if he's going at all. It would make sense that like that's a chasm and split, and he's going. And I think generally when you like look at really a lot of people who are very successful, it's not the money, right? It is the money always, but it's more the power, right? And if you ask like anyone going to Meta, a lot of them will obviously be going for money, but a lot of them are going because now they have control over the AI path for, $1 trillion plus company, and they're right there talking to Zuck, and they can convince one person who has full voting rights over the entire company, right? It's like, there's a lot of power there, right? And they can implement across billions of users, right? Whatever AI technology they want, using the engine of Facebook, whether it be infrastructure or researchers or product, to like push whatever AI product you want, right? And that would like make a lot of sense to me for like an Alex Wang or a Mark Zuck, or for a Nat Friedman or a Daniel Gross, who are they are much more product people, right? Like Nat doing GitHub Copilot, he's a product person, right? He's not an AI researcher, although he knows a lot about AI research. He's a product person, right? And same applies to sort of like Alex. Like obviously he's very well versed with the research, but his super skill set is product and people, and like convincing people and organization, probably not as much the research. That's sort of the angle there, is like they've got like all this power to do a lot at Meta.
Sam Altman also mentioned that Meta has been giving $100 million bonus offers to their top researchers. Apparently, none of the top researchers have left. I want to ask, is that a successful strategy, just to like throw money at the problem, get the best people in? It feels like maybe the cultural element would be lacking there, where, give as much shit as you want to OpenAI and Sam Altman, but there are a lot of true believers there in what they're doing. Is that enough to just throw money and get the best researchers, where that culture is going to be built?
You zoom back, right? It's like, if you believe superintelligence is the only thing that matters, then you need to chase it. Otherwise, you're a loser, right? And Mark Zuckerberg certainly doesn't want to be a loser, and he thinks he can build it. He can build superintelligence too, right? So then the question is like, okay, well, what do you do? Well, then you go and try and acquire the best teams out there, right? Thinking Machines, right? All these ex-OpenAI people, but also there's some other folks from, Character AI, GDM, Meta, et cetera, right? All these great researchers and infra people, and same with SSI, right? It's Ilya and the people he's recruited, trying to recruit people from these companies, or trying to buy these companies. That didn't work out. So now you go with like Alex, who's like tremendously like connected and can help you build the team, and now you got to go get the team, right? Now, what's the difference between like acquiring SSI, where there's like way less than 100 employees, right? I think there's less than even 50 employees at SSI, and for $30 billion, and like, okay, well, you just paid hundreds of millions of dollars per researcher, and 10 billion plus for Ilya, right? Like that's sort of what you just did. And it's like, well, then you're sort of doing the same thing, right? As far as Sam is saying that no top researchers have gone, I don't believe that's accurate. I think initially the top researchers definitely did say no. The best researchers, the best people, and you said $100 million. I've heard a number for someone over $1 billion actually, for one person at OpenAI. But anyways, it's a ridiculous amount of money. But it's like, well, it's the same thing as buying one of these companies, right? Thinking Machines and SSI don't have a product. You're buying them for the people.
If super intelligence is the end all be all, $100 million, even $1 billion is really a drop in the bucket compared to one, Meta's market cap currently, and also the total addressable market of artificial intelligence. I want to talk about Microsoft and OpenAI's relationship a little bit. We're well past the honeymoon phase, it seems. It definitely seems to be kind of the choppy waters of their relationship now. It's clear that
this is now a therapy show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me about your feelings, Sam and Satya.
Well, this is therapy, right? These are two people and they have a relationship, and it does seem to be folding a bit. OpenAI's ambitions seem to have no bounds. Is Microsoft thinking right now, they want to restructure the deal, OpenAI does. Microsoft really has no reason to, but what do you think is going on what do you think about the dynamics of this relationship going forward?
OpenAI would not be where they are without Microsoft, and Microsoft signed a deal where they get tremendous power. It's a weird ass deal because OpenAI wanted to be a nonprofit and they cared about AGI, but at the same time they had to give up a lot to get the money. But at the same time, Microsoft didn't want to run into antitrust stuff, so they structured this deal really weird, right? Which is
Perfect.
There's revenue shares and there's profit guarantees and there's all these different things, but nowhere is it oh yeah, you own X percent of the company, right? I think it's they get it's off the top of my head, but I think it's 20% revenue share, 49 or 51% profit share up until some cap, and then there's Microsoft has the IP rights of all of OpenAI IP until AGI.
Right, AGI.
And it's all of these things are just nebulous as hell, right? It's
right.
I think the profit cap might be 10x. Again, I'm going off the top of my head. It's been a while since I looked at it, but it's if Microsoft gave roughly $10 billion and OpenAI has it's a profit cap of 10x, it's what incentive does Microsoft have to renegotiate now if they get $100 billion of profit from OpenAI, and until then OpenAI has to give them all their profit? Or half of their profit, right? And they get this 20% rev share. And they have access to all of OpenAI's IP until AGI. But what is the definition of AGI? Theoretically, OpenAI's board gets to decide when OpenAI hits AGI. But then if that happens, Microsoft will just sue the shit out of them. And Microsoft has more lawyers than God. So it's this just crazy ass deal. I think there's a few really worrisome things in there for OpenAI. It's one of the main things they got removed already because Microsoft was really scared, I think, about antitrust aspects of this, which was that OpenAI had to exclusively use Microsoft for compute. That they backed off of this last year, and it got announced with the Stargate deal this year, right? Which was that OpenAI is going to go to Oracle and SoftBank and Crusoe and the Middle East to build their Stargate clusters, right? Their next generation data centers. They're still getting a bunch from Microsoft, of course, but a bunch from Stargate. And so, or from Oracle primarily, but the others as well. Whereas before, it was that OpenAI could not do that without going directly to Microsoft, right? OpenAI tried to go to CoreWeave initially, but then Microsoft sort of inserted themselves in the relationship, no, you're exclusively using us. So a lot of GPUs get rented from CoreWeave to Microsoft to OpenAI. But then this exclusivity ended, and now CoreWeave has big deals signed with OpenAI, and Oracle has big deals signed with OpenAI.
What did Microsoft get in that exchange where they're going to give up the exclusivity? Did they get anything, or was it reported that they got anything in exchange for that? Usually it's not just okay, cool, we'll give that up.
What's been reported is just that they gave up the exclusivity. And in return, all they have is a first right of refusal. Anytime OpenAI goes and tries to get a contract for compute, Microsoft can provide that same compute at the same price in the same time frame.
Because reduced risk from antitrust.
Yeah, antitrust is one of the biggest considerations there, but there's other considerations, of course. But antitrust being one of the big ones, because being the exclusive compute provider to OpenAI is a little iffy. And from OpenAI's perspective, they were just really annoyed that Microsoft was way slower than they needed them to be, right? They just couldn't get all the compute they needed. They couldn't get all the data center capacity, et cetera. CoreWeave and Oracle are moving much faster, but even they are not as fast, and so OpenAI is turning to other folks as well, right? There's that butting of heads there, but nowadays, like, the real challenging thing here is, like, Microsoft has the mono repo, has the OpenAI IP. They have rights to it all. They can do whatever they want with it. Now, whether it's like Microsoft playing nice and not doing stuff with it, or being somewhat incompetent and not being able to leverage it, and mostly just like looking through it, whatever the reason is, Microsoft, despite having access, hasn't done a ton, but the possibilities are endless, right? Like, of what could be done. Then the other thing is, like, if you're truly like AGI or now superintelligence pilled, you have all the IP up until superintelligence is let's just say achieved. But that would imply that, like, the day before superintelligence is achieved, you have all of the IP, and then it gets cut off. But you have all the IP up until right there. So it's like 1 day of work. Yeah. Maybe it's hard and it takes 10 days of work instead of 1. Yeah. Or maybe you achieve superintelligence, but it takes some time to get to the deliberations and agreement that you've achieved superintelligence / all the evidence that you've achieved superintelligence. But, like, you've claimed it at this date, but, like, the model that is superintelligent is here. Like, you made it here, Microsoft has access to it, right? So sort of that's the real big risk, or sort of to the super AGI pilled folks. The profit share and all this is, like, very clean and difficult. And most people don't care that much when they're investing in OpenAI. It is challenging to get every investor in the world to be like, yeah, your crazy ass structure, nonprofit, for profit, all this sort of stuff. Okay, that's fine. Oh, Microsoft has rights to all of your profit for a long time and all your IP. So theoretically, you could be worthless if they decide to just, like, take some of your best researchers and implement everything themselves. Oh, wow, right? Like, these sorts of things scare investors. And Sam said it himself, OpenAI is going to be the most capital intensive startup in the history of humanity, right? The valuation is going to keep soaring because of what they're building. OpenAI has no plans to produce profit anytime soon. They've been around for so long, and they're doing like $10 billion of revenue, and they're still not going to do profit for another 5 years. And by then, their projections of revenue are, like, well north of like there are hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion, right, of revenue that they expect themselves to have before they ever turn a profit. And so that whole way through, they're going to be losing money, and they need to keep raising money, and they need to be able to convince everyone who's an investor in the world. And, like, these things are dirty, right? Like, they're not clean and easy to understand.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about compute capacity, and specifically with Azure, being able to go to CoreWeave and elsewhere. I want to talk specifically about 4.5, GPT-4.5. It was deprecated, I believe, last week. This was a massive model, much...
Was it really?
It wasn't it?
I don't know. I thought it was still available in chat. That's why I was just curious.
Well, maybe they just announced the deprecation, but it was imminent.
No, it's still there, but yeah, they announced it. Okay, yeah. So, no, they've talked about, like, no use. There's very little usage of it, so that makes sense.
Was the model too big? Was it too costly to run? What went wrong with GPT 4.5?
Orion is, as it was, like, internally called, what they hoped would be GPT-5. They made that bet, like, in early 24, right? They started training it in early 24. It was a bet on full scale, right? Full scale pre-training, right? We're just going to take all the data, we're going to make this ridiculously big model, and we're going to train it. It is much smarter than 4.0 and 4.1, to be completely clear. I've said it's the first model to make me laugh, like, because it's actually funny. But in general, it's not that useful, and it's too slow, and it's too expensive. Versus other models, right? Like O3 is just better. They went pure on the pre-training scaling. But data doesn't scale, right? So they weren't able to get a ton of data. So without data scaling so fast, right? They have, like, this model that's really, really big, trained on all this compute, but you have this issue called over-parameterization. Generally in machine learning, if you build a neural network and you feed it some data, it will tend to memorize first, and then it will generalize, right? I.e., it'll know that if I ever say the quick brown fox jumped over, it would just know the next token is always lazy, right? It isn't until you've trained it on a lot more data that it learns what quick brown fox even means, what lazy dog is, right? It doesn't actually builds a world model, it generalizes. And to some extent, GPT 4.5 Orion was so large that it was and so over-parameterized that it memorized a lot. Like, actually, when it initially started training, I know people at OpenAI were so excited that they were like, oh my God, it's already crushing the benchmarks and we're barely into training.
Because some of the checkpoints were just so good.
Right, initially.
Yeah.
But that's because it just memorized so much. But then it stopped improving. It like was just memorized for a long time and it didn't generalize. It finally did generalize, right? Because it was such a big, complicated run, they actually had a bug in it for like months, right? During the training, right? Training is like usually a handful of months or less, right? And it's usually less. And they had a bug in the training code for a couple months that was like a very tiny bug that like was messing up the training. It's funny, like when they finally found it, it was like a bug within PyTorch that like OpenAI had found and fixed, and they submitted the patch. There's like 20 people at OpenAI who reacted to the bug fix reaction with like emojis. Right on GitHub. Another thing is like they had to restart training, from checkpoints a lot. It's so big, so complicated, so many things can go wrong, right? And so from an infrastructure perspective, just corralling that many resources and putting them together and having it train stably was really, really difficult. But from another flip side, it's just like, even if the infrastructure and code and everything like that was pristine, you still have this problem of data. You sort of like, everyone points to the Chinchilla paper, from 22, I think. 2022, Google released a paper called Chinchilla DeepMind, and what it basically said is like, for a model, what's the optimal ratio of parameters to tokens? And this only applied to dense models with the exact architecture of Chinchilla model. But it was like, oh, if I have like X flops, I should have this many parameters, this many tokens, right? It's a scaling law, right? Obviously, as you make it bigger, and you apply more flops, the model gets better, but how much data should I add? How much more parameters should I add, right? Now, obviously, so over time, people's architectures change. The exact observations of Chinchilla aren't accurate, right? Which is that like roughly it's 20 tokens per parameter that you want of data that you're training versus parameters in the model, roughly. There's actually a curve and everything. It's more complicated than that. But like that observation is not like identical, but what it is that like as you add compute, you want to add more data and parameters at a certain ratio or along a certain curve of like, there's a formula basically in an ideal world. And they didn't go there, right? They had to go to way more parameters versus tokens. But this was all early 24 when they started training. All these trials, tribulations, they finally get there. And I don't remember when they released 4.5. It was last year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they finally released the model, many months after they start training, after they finish training, pre-training, and then they try and do RL and all this stuff. But in the meantime, different teams at OpenAI figure out something magical, which is the reasoning stuff, the strawberry.
So it was like while they've already invested all this, while they're in process of training this massive model, they realized, okay, for a much lower cost, we can get so much more efficiency, so much higher quality out of a model because of reasoning.
Yeah, and if you really like try and boil down reasoning to first principles, you're giving the model a lot more data. Where are you getting this data from is you're generating it. And how are you generating the data? Well, you're creating these verifiable domains where the model generates data and you throw away all the data where it doesn't get to the right answer, right? Where it doesn't verify that math problem or that code or that unit test was good. So in a sense, it's kind of like, looking backwards. Obviously, I didn't have the intuition then, but like looking backwards, the intuition makes a lot of sense that like, well, 4.5 failed because it didn't have enough data. Also, it was just very complicated and difficult on a scaling perspective, infrastructure-wise. And there were tons of problems and challenges there. But also, they just didn't have enough data. And now, like this breakthrough that happened from a different team is generating more data. And that data is good, right? Like a lot of the synthetic data stuff is like bad data. But like the magic of Strawberry, of reasoning is that the data is good, the data that you're generating. So it's really like, from a first principles basis, makes a lot of sense that data is the wall. Just adding more parameters doesn't do anything.
I want to talk about Apple for a second. I'm sure you have some thoughts on that. Apple is clearly behind. We're not getting much in the way of public models, leaks, anything about knowing what they're doing. What do you think is going on at Apple? Do you think they just made a misstep? They kind of were late to the game. Why aren't they acquiring companies? Like what is happening internally, if you had to guess?
Yeah, so I think Apple is like very, very conservative company. They've acquired companies in the past, but they've never done really big acquisitions.
Beats was the biggest one.
Yeah.
That's a headphone company.
Right, but generally their acquisitions have been really small. Yeah. And they do buy a lot of companies. They just buy really, really small companies early. They identify it. Maybe it's a failing startup or it's, whatever it is. They buy these startups that haven't achieved product market fit and aren't like super sexy. Like as far as like Apple, they've always had problems attracting, in terms of AI researchers like to blab. They like to post and publish their research. And Apple's always been a secretive company. They actually changed that policies to where their AI researchers are allowed to publish. But at the end of the day, they're still a secretive company. They're still like an old, antiquated company. It's like Meta only was able to like hire a bunch of researchers and talent because they had a bunch of ML talent already, right? They've always been a leader in AI. They had this PyTorch team as well, and then they committed to open sourcing a lot.
For a while now, they've been
right.
open sourcing, yeah.
Besides that, like who's been able to acquire AI talent? The DeepMind to OpenAI shift, you know, OpenAI being like the rival to DeepMind and like that whole thing, and like a lot of great researchers coming together to form it, and then the Anthropic Splinter Group. And then like Thinking Machine Splinter Group from OpenAI and SSI's Thinking Splinter Group from OpenAI, right? It's like what companies have actually been able to acquire talent that didn't already have AI talent? It's like Google DeepMind is just like the biggest name in the game, and they've always had the highest inflows of AI researchers and PhDs. And then there's like OpenAI and Anthropic who are sort of, and Thinking Machines and SSI, right? It's all OpenAI. It's hard to get talent to come to you. Now, Anthropic has such a strong culture that they're able to get people, OpenAI is being the leader. Meta, you know, I sort of talked through, it's like, how's Apple going to attract these best researchers? They're not, right? They're going to get, you know, not the best researchers. And so it's really challenging for them to be competitive, right? And then there's the whole, like, they have a stigma against, they hate NVIDIA. And like maybe for reasonable reasons, you know, NVIDIA threatened to sue them over some patents at one point. NVIDIA sold them GPUs that ended up breaking. It was called Bumpgate. It was a very interesting thing.
I don't remember that.
You don't or you do?
No, I don't.
Oh, so okay. So this is a very fun story, right? One generation of NVIDIA's GPUs. I'm going to butcher the exact reason because it's been a while since I read about it.
How many years ago was this?
This is probably like 2015, if not earlier. There's a generation of NVIDIA GPUs for laptops, right? And chips have solder balls on the bottom, right? That connect their I/O pins to the motherboard and, you know, to the CPU, power, et cetera. Somewhere along the supply chain, all the companies, Dell, HPE, Apple, Lenovo, they blamed NVIDIA as far as I understand, but vice versa. NVIDIA said it wasn't their fault. I'm not going to prescribe blame, but like the solder balls would not they were like not good enough, right? And so when the temperatures swung up and down, coefficient of thermal expansion, right? Different materials expand and shrink at different rates. The chip versus the solder balls versus the PCB would expand and shrink at different rates. And what ended up happening is because of that different rate of expansion, the solder balls connecting the chip and the board would crack. And it was called Bumpgate. And now the connection is severed, right? The connection between the chip and the board. And so it's called Bumpgate. And I think Apple wanted compensation from NVIDIA. I think NVIDIA was like, no. There's this whole thing. Apple really hates NVIDIA because of that and because of this like threatening when NVIDIA was trying to get into mobile chips, because they tried to get into mobile chips for a time period and they failed. But at one point they tried to sue everyone over GPU patents in mobile. And so between those two things, Apple really doesn't like NVIDIA, and so Apple doesn't really buy much NVIDIA hardware.
They don't really need to anymore.
Well, they don't need to in the laptops, of course, but like even in data centers, right? It's like, well, like again, if I'm a researcher, first of all, I'm gonna go where the talent is, where I have like my culture fit, where the money is. And even in places that have a ton of compute and good researchers, Meta still has to offer crazy money to get people to come over. It's like Apple One is not gonna offer that crazy money, and also they don't even have compute. And then for inference to serve users, they run it on Mac chips in data centers. It's like very bizarre, and it's like, I don't wanna deal with all that stuff. I wanna build the best models, right? Like it's like, it's challenging for Apple.
Okay, I wanna ask you one last question about Apple. They are very big on-device AI, and I actually really like that approach. Security, latency. What's your take on on-device AI, pushing AI to the edge versus having it in the cloud? Is it somewhere in the middle? What do you think?
So I think I'm generally an on-device AI bear. I don't like it that much. Like personally, I think security is awesome, but I know human psychology. Like free with ads is better than security. No one actually cares about security. They say they do, but the number of people who actually make decisions based on security are very little. I would like privacy and security, of course.
But wait, but you said you like free, but you're not. That's not analogous to on-device AI, right?
No. So like Meta will offer it in the cloud for free. And OpenAI has a free tier, and so Google has a free tier.
And it's going to be better than free, as in running it on your own device.
Right. And that's a big challenge with that, is that on device is that you're limited by the hardware, right? And so how fast the model can inference is really based upon your memory bandwidth of the chip. And if I want to increase the memory bandwidth of the chip, I spend $50 more of hardware. I pass on the cost to the customer. It's $100 more for the iPhone. Great. With $100, I could have like 100 million tokens, right? And it's like, I'm not consuming 100 million tokens. Or better yet, $100, I just save it, and Meta will give me the model for free on WhatsApp and Instagram, and OpenAI will give it free on ChatGPT, and Google will give it free on Google, right? It's really challenging from that perspective. And then lastly, I don't agree with the latency standpoint. Right, I think there's certain use cases where transformers make sense for latency, super tiny next word prediction on your keyboard or spelling. But the AI workloads that are the most valuable to you and I are search a restaurant at this time and go find it from a personal standpoint.
Or access to my Gmail, my calendar, that's all in the cloud anyways.
Right. Yeah. Within business, there's tons of use cases, but my data's all in the cloud anyways. For personal, you and I, it's like, search restaurant, go through Google Maps, make all these calls, right? Go through my calendar, go through my email. All this data is in the cloud anyways, A. B, if it's more of an agentic workflow of terms of like, I'm really feeling Italian and find a restaurant that's between you and I in location. And, we're thinking about Italian, but make sure they have gluten-free options because he's gluten-free, find me a restaurant with a reservation at 7 p.m. tonight. Like, this is a deep research query, and then you get a response. It's like, well, that took minutes. Or like, we envision the future where the AI books flights for us. It's like, this is not book the flight. Okay, it's booked. It's like, book the flight. It's researching. It's finding stuff, and it comes back. But it's going through the web. It's going through cloud, right? Where is the necessity for it to be on device? And because of the hardware constraints, even if it is a streaming tokens thing, your phone cannot run Llama 7B as fast as I can query a server, run Llama 7B, and transmit the tokens back to myself, right? And no one wants to run Llama 7B. They want to run, GPT 4.5 or 4.1 or O3 or Claude Opus or whatever, right? They want to use a good model, right? And those models can't possibly run on device. So it's a really difficult place for the use cases there with integrated with all my data, but it's in the cloud anyways. And it's like, how much of my data does Meta have? Does Google have? Does Microsoft have? Let me plug into all those. Or in the way Anthropic is doing it, they've done this MCP stuff and they're connecting in. You can connect your Google Drive to Anthropic, right? And it's like, oh, wait, even if I don't have my data with Anthropic, they're still able to connect to it if I give them the rights to. So it's like, where's the benefit of on-device AI truly from a use case standpoint? There's certainly one from a security standpoint, but the actual use case is like,
yeah, I think there's probably an argument for a little bit of both, and it probably does skew in terms of the total workload towards cloud. But I think there's an argument for doing at least a portion of the workload on device, anything that you're interacting with the device on. You mentioned typing ahead, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I do think AI will make its way on device. I think it'll just be very low value AI where the cost structure is just so low. Right? I don't think people should design hardware on phones for AI that's going to make it more expensive. Right? If you're going to keep the phone the same price point, add AI capabilities, great. But if you're going to increase the price point, I don't think consumers will do it. How AI on device really will make sense is for example, a wearable, right? An earpiece or smart glasses. And there you're doing small bits and pieces locally, right? Image recognition, hand tracking, but the actual reasoning and thinking is happening in the cloud, right? And that's sort of the view that sort of a lot of these wearables are pushing. I think there will be some AI on devices. Obviously, everyone's going to try. It's not like Samsung and Apple and all these companies are going to sit on their hands. They're going to try stuff. I just think the stuff that's actually going to drive user adoption and revenue and improve customers' lives is going to be skewing towards what's on the cloud, which is why Apple has this strategy, right? Apple's building a couple massive data centers, right? And they're buying hundreds of thousands of their Mac chips and putting them in data centers. They hired Google's head of rack architecture for the TPU, Andy, they're making an accelerator, right? They see cloud as where AI needs to go. They just also have to push it on device. But even Apple themselves, although they won't say it, wants to run a lot of this in the cloud.
Yeah, and they have great chips to do that too. Okay, speaking of chips, let's talk about NVIDIA versus AMD. I have read a couple articles out of SemiAnalysis lately that have kind of said that these new AMD chips are actually really strong. Do you think AMD with their new chips, is that enough to really tackle the CUDA moat, or like, are they going to start taking market share from NVIDIA?
So I think it's a confluence of things, right? So AMD is trying really hard. Their hardware is behind in some factors, especially against Blackwell. But there are some ways their hardware is better, right? And I think the real challenge for them is, like you mentioned, software, right? Like the developer experience on AMD is not that great. It's getting better. We've asked them to do a lot of things to change it, like specific fixes and changes on CI resources and all these other things. There's a long list of recommendations we provided them in December and again more recently, and they've implemented a number of them, a good number of them, but it's like they're so far behind on software. It's incredible. Now, are they going to gain some share? I think they are going to get some share, right? They had some share last year, and they're going to get some share this year. The challenge is like versus NVIDIA's Blackwell, it's just objectively worse, right? As a chip.
The chip alone, not the ecosystem.
The chip alone.
Okay.
Because of the system, right? Because NVIDIA is able to network their chips together because of the networking hardware they've put on their chip with NVLink. Right? So the way that NVIDIA can build their servers is like 72 of them work together really tightly, whereas AMD currently, they can only have 8 of them work together really tightly. And so this is really important for inference and training. And then NVIDIA's got this software stack. It's not just CUDA, right? Like people talk about it's just CUDA, but a lot of people don't touch CUDA, right? Most researchers don't touch CUDA. What they do is they like call PyTorch, and then PyTorch calls down to CUDA and like automatically like it runs on the hardware, right? Whether it's compile or eager mode, whatever you're doing, right? It generally just like maps to NVIDIA hardware really well. In the case of AMD, it doesn't as well. And now even less than that, so many people aren't even touching PyTorch, right? They're going to like VLLM or SGLang, which are inference libraries. They're downloading the model weights off of Hugging Face or wherever, right? And they're plugging it into this inference engine, which is an open source repository on GitHub, either GitHub or either SGLang or VLLM. And then they're just saying go. And then those things are calling, Torch compiled, and those things are calling CUDA and or Triton. And it just like, there's like all these libraries down the stack. Really, the end user just wants to use a model, right? They want tokens. And NVIDIA's building libraries here called Dynamo that make this so much easier for the user. And now, obviously, there are people like OpenAI's of the world and others who will go all the way down to the bottom, right? DeepSeek's and OpenAI's and Metas and stuff. But a lot of users just want to call the open source library, tell them, hey, here's my model weights, run. Here's the hardware, run, right? And here, AMD is trying really hard, but it's still a worse user experience. Not that it doesn't work, but it's that like, hey, if I want to use this library, it's like for NVIDIA, there's 10 flags. For AMD, there's 50 flags, right? That I can, in each of these flags, there's different settings, and it's like, well, what's the best performance? I don't fucking know, right? So AMD, I think, is getting there, right? They're getting there really fast, and they're going to get some share. The other aspect is NVIDIA's not doing themselves favors. There's this ecosystem of cloud companies, right? Of course, everyone knows about the Googles, Amazons, Microsoft, Azure's, right? Those guys have been building AI chips, and NVIDIA's been trying to, and NVIDIA's got AI chips. Obviously, they've always been in contention for a while. And so NVIDIA, as a response, propped up all these other cloud companies, CoreWeave and Oracle, not propped up, like really prioritized them. Oracle, but there's actually over 50 cloud companies out there, Nebius and Together and Lambda, and just go down the list. There's all these different cloud companies. That NVIDIA's really helping, right? They're taking what would have been allocations to Amazon and Google and others and saying, hey, you guys can buy them, right?
Is that to like kind of
to level the playing field,
right,
to make it more of a commodity,
right?
I mean, like you go look at Amazon's margins on GPUs, they're charging like $6 an hour if you were to just rent a GPU without talking to anyone, right? Which is like the cost to buy an NVIDIA GPU and deploy it in a data center is like $1.40 an hour. Right, that's the cost. So then, like, what's a reasonable amount of profit for the cloud? Maybe $2, maybe $1.75, right? That's what NVIDIA wants. They don't want all the profit being sucked up. $6 on Amazon. Now, obviously, you can negotiate with Amazon to get much lower, right? But like, you don't want to just like Yeah, it's like really tough. So NVIDIA's propping up all these different cloud companies, which is driving down the price. But now they've made a big major misstep, in my opinion. They acquired this company called Lepton, who doesn't own data centers themselves, but they built all the cloud software for reliability, for making it run easily, Storm Kubernetes, all this kind of like scheduling stuff. This is stuff the clouds do, right? Which the big clouds do, the neo clouds, the new cloud companies that NVIDIA's propping up do. But now NVIDIA's bought this company that does this software layer. And they're doing this thing called DGX Lepton, which is if anyone has a cloud with spare resources, GPUs, just give them to us and we'll rent them for you. And we'll just give it to us bare metal, no software on them, and we'll add all of this Lepton software on top and rent it out to users. Now, the cloud companies are really mad at this because it's like, you're directly competing with me, right? And in fact, I think NVIDIA is also going to put some of their own GPUs on Lepton potentially that they're installing themselves. But it's like you propped us all up, but now you're making a competing cloud. So a lot of clouds are mad. They won't say it to NVIDIA because NVIDIA is sort of God, right? You don't mess with God, right? What Jensen giveth, Jensen taketh. But like they'll tell us, the clouds are really mad, right? And so there's this like aspect, and so there's some cloud companies that are turning to AMD. Maybe partially out of AMD paying them, partially out of AMD being mad at NVIDIA. But like some of these cloud companies are now buying AMD GPUs. And then there's this third thing that AMD is doing, which is they're doing sort of what everyone accused. I don't know if you've seen this CoreWeave NVIDIA fraud nonsense.
Yeah. Sending revenue
like,
back and forth.
Fraud because NVIDIA pays them. It's like, yeah, NVIDIA rented one cluster from them.
Yeah.
Cool.
Seems like business as usual. Didn't
well,
seem like
NVIDIA
that.
needs GPUs internally, right? They have to develop their software.
I mean, there's like a little something there, but it seems like, yeah, exactly.
And
they
NVIDIA invested like a tiny amount of money, right? But whatever. It's like so irrelevant, right? Yeah. Like, but AMD's actually doing this and like taking it to overdrive. They're getting clusters at Oracle and Amazon and Crusoe and DigitalOcean and TensorWave, and they're renting GPUs back from them. Right? So they're selling them GPUs and renting them back. Like, it's one thing if CoreWeave like buys NVIDIA GPUs and a small portion of them go to NVIDIA, but the vast majority are going to Microsoft for OpenAI.
You're not calling this like accounting trickery though, right?
It's not accounting trickery. It's like perfectly like the accounting is legal. Obviously, you can sell someone something and then rent something from them. Like NVIDIA's done this too.
They're almost funding the investment, right?
Right, exactly. And so this is sort of like, in the case of like Oracle and Amazon, it's like, hey, buy our GPUs, we'll rent them back. You'll see that it's great, and you can actually have some of them we won't rent back. Some of them you'll try and rent to your customers, so that drums up interest. And if it works out, you can buy more, right? This is their reasoning, right? Or for the neo clouds, it's like, well, you guys are only buying NVIDIA stuff. Why don't you buy our stuff? Here's a contract to get you comfortable, and yeah, here's a portion that you can rent out to other people, right? Like it's like this makes sense to some extent, but it's also to some extent like a lot of the sales are just AMD buying them back. But it's like this fosters really good relations, right? Now TensorWave and Crusoe, who are clouds, they're like, I love AMD, right? Because they're renting GPUs from me and they're selling them to me and they're renting them back and I make a profit off of this. And now I can reinvest this in more AMD GPUs. Or I have a chunk of AMD GPUs I can rent to other people. And meanwhile, these clouds are like, well, fuck, NVIDIA's trying to compete with me anyways. Like, what else am I going to do? So it's like an interesting confluence. I think AMD will do well. I don't think they'll like surge in market share, but I think they'll do okay, right? Like I think they'll sell billions of dollars of chips.
But if you're advising a company on which chipset to invest in for the foreseeable future, you're saying NVIDIA.
Depends on the price you can get from AMD. I think there's a price where it makes sense to use AMD, and I think AMD will sometimes offer that price to people. Meta uses AMD a good bit. They also use a lot of NVIDIA. They use a good bit of AMD. For certain workloads where AMD is actually better, when I have the software talent and AMD is giving me a ridiculous price, yeah, you should do it, and that's why Meta does it, right? But like in a lot of workloads, Meta still goes to NVIDIA because that NVIDIA's the best.
I want to talk about XAI. I want to talk about Grok 3.5. Obviously, we like at least publicly, there's not a ton of information about it. Elon Musk has said it's by far the smartest AI on the planet, and it's going to operate on first principles. Is this all puffery? Have they actually discovered something new and unique? Specifically, that he asked for divisive but true facts. Like there's like a lot of things that he's doing where it just seems like either he discovered something new or it is pure puffery. What's your take on what's going on?
I think Elon is a fantastic engineering manager, but I also think he's a fantastic marketer. I don't know what the new model will look like. I've heard it's good, but you've heard it's good. Everyone's heard it's good, right? So, we'll see when it comes out. When Grok 3 came out, I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I was expecting it to be a little bit worse, but it was actually better than I expected.
Do you use Grok 3 day to day?
Day to day, I don't, but there's certain queries I do send to it.
Well, like what, if you don't mind me asking?
Their deep research is much faster than OpenAI, so I use that sometimes. And then sometimes like models are just like pansies about like giving me data, right? That I want, right? Like it's like, it's like sometimes I'm just curious, like I like human geography, like the history of humanity, how geography, politics, history, resources like interact with each other. And so I like to know about demographics and things like that as well, right? It's just interesting stuff. The town I grew up in, right, is like, it's like on the Bible Belt, it's half black, half white, 10,000 population. But like one of the ways I describe it to people is like, well, yeah, it's like where the floodplains used to be and the ocean receded, it's extremely fertile land. And that's when in Georgia, when white settlers settled everywhere randomly, happened to be one of the more fertile areas. So they were able to have better harvests and then they were able to then purchase slaves. And that's why it's a higher black percentage than most of the state. And it's like, that's an insane thing to say, but I like to like reason about like sort of human geography like this. And like Grok is okay with doing that, right? So sometimes like, it lets me and obviously like slavery is bad and like that's, it's like, but like just like to understand like, or like, hey, why, like invasions from like the steppe to Europe were not because they just wanted to invade. It's because it was like becoming more arid. And so they were like forced off their land. And like, like these sorts of things are cool and interesting. Or economic history, right? Like why did Standard Oil win versus this other oil company, right? Before it got to like monopoly levels, right? It's like these sorts of things are just interesting to learn. But like other models will start like, if it's like the Standard Oil thing, like it'll be like, oh, it's a union buster, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, just like tell me like what actually happened, right? And so like I think Grok can sometimes get through the bullshit, but it's also not the best model. So the model I go to the most is either O3 or Claude 4.
You're using O3 day to day, even though there's, it takes so much time to actually get your response back.
It depends on the topic, but yeah, I think a lot of times I'm okay with waiting. A lot of times I'm not. That's why I use Claude. I use Gemini in work. Right, so we feed a lot of permits and regulatory filings through Gemini. We feed a lot of like it's like really good at long context, right? And document analysis and retrieval. So we feed a lot of stuff through Gemini in a workplace manner. But like I'm talking about, pull out my phone, I want to know something mid conversation or whatever. It's a different model.
So okay, so back to
so Grok, Grok. They have a lot of compute. It's really concentrated. They have a lot of great researchers. Will they, they've got like 200,000 GPUs already up, and they've purchased a new factory in Memphis, and they're building out a new data center, and there's there's the craziness they did with like mobile generators. Well, now they just bought a power plant from overseas and are shipping it to the US because they couldn't get a power plant, a new one in time. So like they're doing all this crazy shit to get the compute. They've got good researchers. Clearly the models are good. And Elon's hyping them up. Maybe it'll be great. Maybe it'll be good. Maybe, will it be OpenAI level or will it be like just slightly behind? I don't know. But
are they doing something fundamentally different? He specifically said, rewrite the corpus of human knowledge because too much garbage is in the current foundation models. He must, obviously he has the X data, which is insane, but
it's also really low quality. So it's hard to get through.
Right. So,
but also at the same time, that's another area where I use Grok sometimes, current events.
Summarizing or giving you the context.
When the missiles were happening in Israel and Iran and all this war stuff, you can actually ask Grok, and it tells you exactly what's happening way better than a Google search will or even a Gemini query or OpenAI query, because it's got access to all this info.
Yeah. So are they doing anything different?
I
like step function different. Like
I think step function different wise. I don't think anyone is like. Like everyone likes to think they're doing different things, but generally people are doing the same thing. They're pre-training large transformers and they're doing RL on top, mostly in verifiable domains, although they're researching how to do unverifiable domains. It's like, oh yeah, they're making environments for the model to play in, but they're mostly code and math, but now they're getting into like computer use and, all these other things. It's like everyone's doing generally the same stuff, but there's it's also like such a challenging problem. There's many directions to go with it, but I think generally everyone's going the same approach. Even SSI is not. I imagine SSI is doing some different stuff, but I don't even think they're doing that much differently than what I just said.
I have kind of two different topics I want to let you maybe choose. Economics, labor. So I want to talk about the 50% of white collar jobs could disappear. I know you probably read about that. Or non-verifiable rewards, which obviously that's maybe more recent, more on your mind. You have any preference?
I think the prior is more. I mean, maybe the latter is more interesting for your audience. I'm not sure, but the prior is really interesting, right? In terms of like everyone's worried about massive job loss, right? Or at least some people are in the AI world. But then the flip side is that like populations are aging really rapidly, and generally people work less than ever before, right? Like we make fun of Europeans because they work really a lot less. But like the average amount of hours worked 50 years ago was way higher, right? And 100 years ago is even higher than that. And the amount of leisure time was way less. And the size of everyone's home is way larger. And like the food security is way better. It's like every metric we're way better than 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And AI should just enable us to work even less, right? Now, is it going to be like, there's going to be psychos like myself and probably yourself as well that work way too much. And then there's going to be like normal people who work way less, right? And obviously the distribution of resources is the challenge though, right? I think that's the big thing. That's why I'm super excited about robotics as well, because robotics is like, a lot of jobs that are easier to automate or hardest to automate are robotics influenced. And the stuff people want to do is sit on a computer and be creative. But actually, that's one of the markets that's been nuked the hardest is freelance graphics designers, right? And what's the market that's like not touched is like picking fruit. Right. And it's like that's the shit that people don't want to do.
And it still seems like that's way in the future, even though robotics has been progressing at an insane rate. But it does seem like it's pretty far in the future still. Okay. But do you foresee as human productivity increases like crazy, certainly a large swath of tasks will be automated? Do you think humans are going to be managing AI in the future, or are we going to be reviewing the output of AI, or some mixture of in between?
Right now, we're in the transition from using models on a chat basis to a longer horizon basis. I mentioned I used O3 a lot because actually there's a lot of longer horizon tasks. Now, these longer horizon tasks are 20, 30 seconds. In deep research is dozen minutes, right? Dozens of minutes. Over time, these like interactions with AI will become. Obviously, there will be an AI assistant that I'm just talking to all the time or will be telling me stuff that is noteworthy. But there will also be just long horizon tasks of like AI is going to be doing stuff for hours, days before coming back for me to review. And then eventually, like there just won't be humans in the loop, right? And eventually,
you believe that? And like, what timeline are you thinking?
I think timeline questions are ridiculous. I'm generally more pessimistic on timelines. Like it's not. I don't think this decade for people to, for like 20% of jobs to be automated. I think it's it's like maybe the end of this decade, maybe the beginning of next, for 20% of jobs to be automated, right? Meanwhile, there's people saying AGI in 2027, but their definition of AGI,
but even
like
reaching the
earlier,
tech doesn't mean the implementation is going to happen at that moment either, right? It's going to take years before we actually are able to deploy it in the field.
I think deployment will be really fast. You already see the junior software engineering market is nuked. No one can get a job. You can already see the usage of AI and software development is skyrocketing. And we're not even at automated software development yet. We're just at like code assistant.
Are companies going to choose to do more things? Are they going to choose to tackle more problems?
Yes.
So then, like, how do those junior engineers get into the market to begin with then? I assume, like, I spoke to Aaron Levy yesterday, and he was like, no, as soon as a team tells me, look how productive we are, where do you think I'm going to invest? I'm going to invest back in that team. We're going to grow that team. Where is the place for junior engineers then?
Yeah, I think that's nice, and I agree. And like I myself, like my company does a bunch of stuff, but due to the use of AI, we can do a whole lot more stuff, and that makes us more productive. We're able to outcompete the old firms that don't do stuff in the consulting and data space. But it's like, I still have like basically doubled the size of the firm in the last year to 32 now, 33. How many junior software developers am I going to hire? It's like, no, it's like the junior software developer I have, like we just cheered her on because she just did like 50 commits like last week, and it's like. That's what used to take many more people. It's like how much stuff, like there's obviously a lot of software for us to build. But it's like, how many people can we like actually like, add, right? And it's like, wouldn't I rather have like a senior person that's like commanding a bunch of AIs rather than like a junior person? So it's like sort of like, it's challenging. At the same time, like, hiring young people because they can quickly adapt to the new AI tools, right? It's sort of like, it's a balancing act. I think it's. I don't know where the junior software developers would go because I get people pinging me on like Twitter and LinkedIn all the time. Like, you have a job for me? It's like, no, I don't really, but like, or sometimes I do, right? But it's like it's tough, and I don't see the major tech companies hiring junior software developers that much, right? It's just a fact, right? And that's why the market is really bad.
So they had to just self-skill up on their own, come with better skills, but
or
those
just
are the
try
things.
and build stuff on their own and show that they're not a junior software developer, but they can actually use these tools.
That's not for everybody though.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. A lot of people just need a job. They don't need to like self-start and like.
They don't want to be founders for sure. They don't want to be kind of solo builders. Even if you're not a founder, they want to have
Need
that
direction,
security.
yeah. I mean, that's been a problem for me is like when I started hiring people is like some people need a lot of direction and I don't have direction to give. I'm like, I need self-starters, right? Yeah. Now there's like people who can, do that like in the firm, but like it's tough to like give people, some people just need direction and need more hand-holding, at least initially.
Open source versus closed source, and why?
The US is going to lose in open source unless Meta gets dramatically better, which they are. I think with a lot of the talent they're hiring, I think Sam is wrong that they're not getting any top researchers. Sam Altman, I think they are. There's some top researchers I know for sure are going there. Maybe not the first people they offered, right? Like the ones that like have the highest profile, but there are still some top researchers going there. China is open sourcing stuff only because they're behind. The moment they're ahead, they will stop open sourcing stuff. And at the end of the day, closed source will win. Unfortunately, closed source will win. My only hope is that it's not just like 2 or 3 closed source AIs that like dominate human GDP, right? Or types of models or companies, right? But rather it's like more distributed than that, but it might not be, right?
Meta, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Tesla, whoever else, you had to pick one company to bet on. Super intelligence, reaching it first. Who are you picking and why?
OpenAI, they're the first to every major breakthrough. Even reasoning, they were the first to. And I don't think reasoning alone will take us to the next generation. So there's going to be something else. Anthropic second. Third it's a toss-up
Anthropic's so
between,
conservative though.
Huh?
They're so conservative at Anthropic in terms of what they release, what they publish, what they focus on. So much safety. I mean,
I think their conservatism
appreciative
has
of
weakened a lot. I think they're a lot less conservative than they used to be.
Okay.
Like the process for launching Claude 4, as far as I understand, was much simpler and easier than the process for launching Claude 3. Whether it's that they're hiring a lot more normies, which they are, or like they recognize that others are just going to release stuff anyways and they should have theirs, or whatever it is. I think Anthropic is like loosening up a bit. I think they just have really good people though. And then sort of like third is going to be like, it's actually a toss-up between Google, XAI, and Meta now. I think Meta will get enough good people that they'll actually be competitive too.
Dylan, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Appreciate it. This is awesome, man.
Yeah, very fun.
Yeah, you can talk about anything, huh?
Maybe.